Peace and blessings, everybody. This is Rudy. It's September the 18th, 2017. It is Monday. I was talking to Jeffrey Weinhaus on the phone while he was in prison today, and he pointed me to this. He said he wrote this back in 2016. So let's read it together. Show me Black Lives Matter, Black American Manifesto. Bulletin man Jeff Weinhaus wants to be Black Americans' best friend. Racism is alive and well in the land of the free and the home of the slave. Even though a half black man was elected in 2008. The facts are such that the state of Black America is failing. The 1965 Voting Rights Act has been nullified by the school to prison pipeline. By the time a black male reaches his 30th birthday, he has a 90% chance of being in the system with a felony, which cancels his right to vote. Is that true? That seems like a crazy statistic. I'll have to confirm that. Black Americans are approximately 13% of the general population, though in the state of Missouri, over 70% of the prison population are black. In 2015, over 170 murders have occurred in St. Louis. 90% of them are black. Over 70% remain open unresolved. The system, police, courts, simply do not care and are allowing this carnage to go on. Over half of the black gun cases, defendants are given probation and allowed to go back into society to commit more crimes. Great for lawyers, bad for the community. In Missouri, since 9/11/2012, over 20 black Americans have died at the hands of police. Not one cop has been indicted. Mike Brown was the rule, not the exception. Darren Wilson put 12 rounds into Mr. Brown despite the worldwide media coverage. The St. Louis County, PA prosecuting attorney actually held a news conference to discredit the victim. Looters are allowed to riot and torch over 25 businesses in Ferguson. Governor Nixon withdrew the state guard. The announcement of no indictment was timed to ensure civil unrest. The Black Lives Matter movement was born in St. Louis, Missouri. The March 2015 Ferguson DOJ report only confirmed what has been obvious to not only black Americans but poor people. Over $140 million was extorted from the less fortunate under the color of the law by a biased system. The courts are instruments of oppression. A crime is an act that causes injury, loss, or harm. Thus, the criminals are the courts and their enforcers, the police. A child growing up without a father in a house is 8 times more likely to end up in the system. This is by design to benefit the lawyers and the rest of the 9/11 industry. Probation, parole officers, prison guards, social workers, etc. So-called civil rights leaders have been bought off and refuse to strike / expose the root of the problem. They will talk of the symptoms but not address the cause and the cure. 1.2 million abortions in America. 1.2 million abortions a year in America. Over 800,000 are black babies. Planned Parenthood, Google Margaret Sanger clinics are located in the inner city urban areas. This is by design to wipe out the black population. 1.1 million lawyers in the world. Some 900,000 in America, less than 10% are black Americans. America is less than 5% of the world population, though over 25% of the world's prisoners. Out of the 25%, over 18% are black. 95% of federal prisoners are drug-related. 85% of them are black. Drug laws are skewed to snare black citizens. Out of the 535 federal lawmakers, less than 60 are people of color. Out of the 160 state lawmakers In Missouri, less than 20 are people of color. Black preachers are more concerned about their Mercedes-Benz and their Learjets. They refuse to address real issues that plague black Americans. They attempt to compromise and appease the system. Example, better family life in St. Louis, amnesty days for traffic fines. Leaders such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X are assassinated or jailed, or they are bought off. Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and Louis Farrakhan. The first war in America, the Revolution, was fought over taxation without representation. With the vast majority of black Americans in the system, they are voteless. Even if the right to vote was restored, which it should be now that even prisons charge sales tax, less than 2% of county clerks in Missouri are black. It's not who votes that matters, it's who counts the vote. Joe Stalin. The county clerk counts the vote. In 2000, George Bush won Florida because his brother Jeb took over 50,000 blacks off the voting rolls. The Supreme Court of America ignored this fact and installed George W. Bush. The second war in America, the Civil War, which cost this country over 600,000 lives, may have abolished the institution of outright slavery, though 150 years later, as I have demonstrated in this manifesto, very little has actually changed. The so-called civil rights movement was a farce, window dressing which has put a band-aid on a bullet hole. The Black on Campus movement was birthed in Missouri. Colleges are far from equal. The racism went unaddressed and ignored until the football team refused to play. Only 13% of the student population at Mizzou is black. Even though the president was forced to resign, only 3% of the faculty are of color. None of the concerns of the black students have actually been addressed. Governor Nixon has refused to meet with the protesters and leaders. Attorney General Costner has done nothing to address the Black Lives Matter movement or the Black on Campus movement. The Democratic leadership, and I use that term loosely, of the Show Me State has shown America that silence is not only consent, but silence actually amounts to violence. Compare the Show Me State with their lily white leadership to Maryland. Compare Ferguson to Baltimore. When Freddie Gray died in the back of a police van, riots broke out. A riot is the language of the unheard. The black mayor and prosecuting attorney brought charges against the police within 10 days of Freddie's death, which turned the riots into celebrations. The excessive force issue is the fuel that is about to set this nation on fire. In 2015, over 950 citizens of this country were murdered by the police. Out of 950, 70% were black. Only 12 cops have been indicted. Half of them are black. America, the golden country, is a lie. Equal justice under the law is a myth. America is on the verge of another civil war. Equal rights and opportunity, Article 1, Section 2, Missouri Constitution, are not afforded the vast majority of all citizens of this state. Economic opportunity is a black and white problem. There is a permanent underclass throughout Missouri and America. The poor have no voice. President Johnson's Great Society of the 1960s, some 50 years later, has turned the American dream into a nightmare. The 13th Amendment of 1865 on paper may have freed the slaves, though the 14th Amendment made the vast majority of Americans black, white, yellow, brown, red, slaves who are now responsible for the national debt, which is over $19 trillion. The ruling class, the 1%, the majority of lawyers, have bought off the media with commercial buys, advertising shyster lawyers, running for office, and personal injury lawsuit solicitation. The mainstream media is the problem, not the solution. A free press is another American myth. America was built upon the backs of slave labor and the working class, who have been abandoned by the system that only serves the elite ruling class. Black-robed terrorists are a great threat to America than ISIS and Arab radicals. The enemy is within the gates. Nothing short of massive reformations will fix America. Failure to do so will only hasten America's fall. Governor Weinhaus, the ultimate outsider. That was Jeffrey Weinhaus's Black Lives Manifesto he wrote back in 2016. The last line of peaceful defense between a tyrannical government and the defendant is jury nullification.